So we're going to learn some excerpts and jump around, and I haven't even figured out exactly where I'm going to be jumping around in this Farbrengen from Tes going into Yud Kislev, Tuf Shin. Oh, I thought I uploaded the document. What happened? Where'd that go?
It was there.
Now I gotta find it again. Page 5. Okay, so we're gonna go to the bottom of the page. Yud. So we were talking about earlier in this, the Rebbe was talking about in the Farbrengen over here earlier. Why is it that the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe came, or let's put it this way, what the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe celebrates, why does it go before what the Geula of the Alter Rebbe celebrates? In other words, in the calendar, the Geula of the Mittler Rebbe is on the 10th of Kislev, the redemption of the Alter Rebbe is on the 19th of Kislev. So the Rebbe explained that since the Mittler Rebbe's situation was a lot less severe, and when you're dealing with a situation that's much less severe, so you always go min hakal ala kovid. You always go from the easier, from the lighter one, meaning the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe was a lighter imprisonment, not so severe. He was more under an arrest in a home, not his own home, but he was an arrest in a house rather than taken to prison, etc., etc. Whereas the Alter Rebbe was a lot more dangerous situation. And this danger made it a less severe, the danger made it more severe. So you go from easier to more difficult. You go from Yud Kislev to Yud Tes Kislev. So the Rebbe is going to ask, that's all fine and good now at present, when we have on the calendar first Yud Kislev, then Yud Tes Kislev. But in those years between the Alter Rebbe's imprisonment and release from imprisonment and the Mittler Rebbe's, which was like 40 odd years, the Alter Rebbe was in Taf Kuf Nun Tes or something like that, Nun Ches, Nun Tes. And the Mittler Rebbe's imprisonment was Tafkuf Pei Zayin, okay, 30 something years, around 30 years. So how come all that time we were able to celebrate Yud Tes Kislev immediately without the need of a different type of Geula to precede it? Let's see the question inside. It is the third paragraph from the bottom. Since earlier the Rebbe established that the order has to be going from the lighter thing to the more difficult thing, you're talking, how is it possible? When you look in the yearly celebrations, when first in the earlier years when they celebrated the redemption of the Alter Rebbe, first, there was only Yud Tes Kislev, without the preparation of the 10th of Kislev, which the Rebbe said earlier in the Farbrengen, needs to precede the 19th of Kislev. The explanation this is, when there were more luminous years, in other words, more spiritually elevated years. There could have been and was possible to be the redemption of the 19th of Kislev without the preparation of the redemption of the 10th of Kislev. You didn't need all that introduction to be able to get into the 19th of Kislev. But when the darkness overpowered in the world, so now we're not able to just enter directly into Yud Tes Kislev. We first need the preparation of the easier and lighter Geula of the 10th of Kislev before entering the 19th of Kislev. Therefore, Vishanim Rishonis in the early years, Hayychayim as Gulas Yud Kislev, Loyachon the Gulas Yud Kislev. In the earlier years, they would celebrate the redemption of the 19th of Kislev without the preparation of the redemption of the 10th of Kislev. When the darkness overcame in the world, to such a degree did we see that the darkness was an ascendancy in the world, that there was possible to be the imprisonment, that Muram Tzoi of the Mittler Rebbe. How could that be? Didn't we just release the Alter Rebbe a few decades ago? Despite the fact that this very same government was the one that released the Alter Rebbe. This very government itself allowed the general avoid of spreading out the well springs. Still, although there was afterwards a prosecution and persecution, and the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe. All this indicates how much darkness increased in the world since the times of Alter Rebbe. That Alter Rebbe's imprisonment was not enough to forestall, delay, stop that the Mittler Rebbe should be imprisoned. The Gulas Yud Kislev kedei lagia lagoy la'ila the Gulas Yud Kislev. Therefore, that itself is the cause that now it's necessary, the preparation of the redemption of Yud Kislev, to be able to reach the great advantage of the Geula of the 19th of Kislev. And here's going to bring a very interesting example of this from our daily davening. So he says in Yud Aleph, an example of this is concerning the general idea of davening. It's explained by the Alter Rebbe, L'Kutei Torah, Shemedaraisa ein tzarich ki im krishma ma'at tefillah. Min HaTorah, from this perspective of what it says in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, all we need is Kriyat Shema and a little bit of asking Hashem for our needs. For example, in the first base of Mikdash Eloi Hayu Mispalim, they didn't daven like we daven now. Because their mind was clear in the upper realms the entire day. Lirois Lahav employs in Sof Baruch Hu to see and to understand the wonders of the Ein Sof. But the members of the Great Assembly, at the beginning of the times of the second base of Mikdash, Rosh and Ismatu Asichlim, they saw that the intellect was decreased, and the hearts became closer to the materialism, if you will, that they would, and to see only things having to do with the material world. Therefore, they established for the populace the davening and all the brachas and Shemoneh Esrei and so on. Yet, what the Anshe Knesset Agdoila established is not the same thing that was later established even further. Moving for this understood, when the darkness of the world increased and was strengthened even more, even after the time of the Mishnayos, and even after the time of Gemara, more things were added in davening. Seemingly it's puzzling. If in the times of the Beis HaMikdash they didn't say that, why us low people are saying it? But that's the very reason. Because we are so materialistic, we need more infusion and more energy from the davening. This means to say, Tzarech li is close in the Birchas Krishma, Psuke de Zimra, v'oidin yanim shoyim kain Psuke de Zimra, as a preparation for the idea of tefillah. And tefillah in the expression of the Gemara is talking about Shemoneh Esrei, the 18, 19 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei. So now there had to be all the brachas that precede the Shema Yisrael and follow Shema Yisrael. And we need to have the psukim of praise from Baruch Sha'amar till Yishtabach, or from Hoidu to Yishtabach. There's the things that we say before Psuk de Zimra. Also, in a similar vein, different types of preparations before davening. You gotta learn things that'll inspire us before davening. Gotta give tzedakah before davening. How come? Why is this not something that was done in previous generations, in earlier years, in the times of Bayis Rishon or Bayis Sheni? Chalzeh mipnei sheis gabrus choshech ha'olam, because the overpowering of the darkness of the world. And the Rebbe explains this also helps something else that we find also a strange thing. Customs, minhagim that were never there before, we do now. It's also the reason for the increase and addition of many, many Jewish customs in the latter generations. After the Gemara was closed, there was no more Gemara. After the time of the Geonet in Babylon, and after the Rishonim like Rashi, Rambam, and Ramban, and so on, even the Talmud Vasik Asilachadish in such a way that a diligent student is going to come up with new things. And the Rebbe has a very interesting thing. We can't treat these things lightly. Since these customs spread out and were accepted amongst the whole scattered Klal Yisrael, they have the full force of both a positive commandment and a negative commandment, like it's explained in the Rambam. So what's the reason for that? Why in the earlier generations did they not need these minhagim? In the earlier generations, when the darkness of the world was not so great, they did not need to have such an increase in matters of holiness. When the darkness of the world is constantly increasing, we have to add so much more powerfully in all matters that are connected with the light of holiness, the light of Torah and its mitzvahs, to nullify and to transform the darkness of the world. So from this, we see an example for what we said earlier about the need for a few years after Yitas Kislev to have Yud Kislev preceded. It's understood concerning our concept. In earlier years, it was possible to celebrate the redemption of Yutes Kislev without the preparation of Yud Kislev. We could go straight from mundane, ordinary weekday into celebration of Yutes Kislev. But when the darkness of the goals increased to such a degree that there was a possibility to imprison the Mittler Rebbe, in addition to that was added now the light, the additional light that comes because of the redemption of the Mittler Rebbe on Yud Kislev, skip the parentheses. Zekukim ato lachona di Yud Kislev k'dei lagia lagoydla ili di Gulos Yutas Kislev. Now we need the preparation of the 10th of Kislev to be able to reach the greater revelation of the 19th of Kislev. Let us skip over a little bit to the next page. Let's go to the paragraph after Yud Gimel, the fourth paragraph on the page. Though it was explained previously, that the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe was in a much lighter way, not so harsh as the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, like it's related in the story of the imprisonment, that he didn't imprison him actually in a prison. The way it was by the Alter Rebbe, they was actually sent to prison. They placed him in a government building, in a room under guard. Still in all. The very fact that the Mittler Rebbe could be arrested after the redemption of the Alter Rebbe, which took place only a few years before it, it shows on how dark the world became. The redemption of the Alter Rebbe was such a way that the government itself recognized his righteousness. Like the Alter Rebbe wrote in his well-known letter, that was in such a way that Hashem made wonders, and he made it great in the land in the eyes of all the ministers and all the nations. In other words, this was something that was so visible even to the nations of the world. In such a way that all those at the ends of the earth saw this. The very fact, after such a resounding type of redemption of the Alter Rebbe, there could be a prosecution and an imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe. This indicates on the great overpowering darkness of the world. The imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe occurred after the Alter Rebbe received the lofty title, a government title, a respected citizen for generations. And the reason why was, skip the parentheses, Avur Shiur Shaloi L'Rusim Napoleon, because of the Alter Rebbe's assistance to the Russians in the war against Napoleon. Like it's known, the story about it, Alter Rebbe had a spy in Napoleon's camp, and through him, the Alter Rebbe related information about Napoleon to the Russians. So, all of this took place before the Mittler Rebbe became a Rebbe. Regardless, the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe took place a few years afterwards. From here, it's emphasized even more so the great, powerful darkness of the world that was in that time. The ultimate purpose of the powerful darkness, of when darkness increases, is to nullify and transform the darkness through increasing in the light of Kedusha. Because through that, when you take darkness and you transform into light, so then the elevation is so much greater than if you don't have darkness in the first place. Similar to the general idea that every descent is for the sake of an ascent, and specifically through a descent, it's possible to reach a much higher ascent. According to this, understood that there's an advantage in the 10th of Kislev over the 19th of Kislev. Since the descent from the strengthening of the darkness of the world during the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe was lower than the descent that was during the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, as we mentioned before, because the Mittler Rebbe's imprisonment followed and took place after the redemption of the Alter Rebbe. So therefore it was much lower. If it was much lower, so then the transformation is much higher than through this greater descent of Yud Kislev, it's affected a much higher type of elevation than the elevation of the 19th of Kislev. According to the great powerful descent of the darkness of the Golus, And the Rebbe goes on to say, V'Yisraelim is even more so. Not only is the redemption of the 10th of Kislev greater than the redemption of the 19th, because the descent is so much greater. The Yud Kislev poil haysafa be'ilui Yutas Kislev. Yud Kislev adds to Yutas Kislev. Like we said earlier, in the Yud Kislev that the idea of the 10th of Kislev is a preparation and a cause that brings the result of the 19th of Kislev. So he said, Meres, because of the overcoming of the darkness of the world, so Hashem uncovered His holy arm. In other words, He brought to bear His power and His holiness to overcome this darkness. Through the revelation that took place by the redemption of the 10th of Kislev. Through that became a much higher elevation, comparable to the great descent. So therefore, the Rebbe concludes, moving according to this is understood, one should not say the joy of Yud Kislev is not so much like Yutas Kislev. Basiyas Cheshben, by making a calculation, Yutas Kislev Chag HaChagim, Yutas Kislev is the Yom Tov of Yom Tovim, like the Rebbe Rashab writes in a famous letter about Yutas Kislev. And Yudas Kislev, the Rebbe Rashab calls it Rosh Hashanah l'Torah Chassidus l'Darkei Chassidus, like we also quoted in Yom Yom. It's a Rosh Hashanah for the teaching of Chassidus and the ways of Chassidus. Mashenki Yud Kislev Chul, as opposed to Yud Kislev, it's only this lighter type of imprisonment that preceded the more severe imprisonment. So we might think that Yud Kislev is a less joyous day than Yudas Kislev. Comes the Rebbe and teaches us today. The Rebbe is always in the present. Today is always the highest day. Yud Kislev is higher than Yutas Kislev. Ki adrabim, just the opposite. My days that Shechoygim Eschaga Geula Yud Kislev B'Yeser says, when we celebrate the celebration of the 10th of Kislev so much more powerfully, this adds and makes an increase in the great joy of the celebration of the 19th of Kislev. This Yud Kislev celebration, because it's so powerful, because it's so great, it will add joy and it will bleed over into Yudas Kislev. So this is how joyous we have to be on this day. And the Rebbe brings it down in a practical way that when Yidden see miracles, whether Klal Yisrael, whether the individual, Amr Le'elo is Hamal Yud Kislev Tzarech Lismovin Chalech and Vechem Yisrael, what we just now said about the advantage of the 10th of Kislev has to be understood to every single Yid. Ki Yidua Pisgam Admor Hazokin, like it's known, the saying of the Alter Rebbe, skip the parentheses, Shetoyres HaChsidus Shayeches Chalech and Vechem Yisrael, that the teaching of Chassidus is not belongs to a certain party. If you're a member of the club, then you learn Chassidus. No, Chassidus belongs to every Yid. The explanation this is, Al pidugma mukshis ba'avodas ha'adam, by an example that we could, a tangible example in the avoid of a person. Kasher Yehudi roya bin Yonov hashgacha pratis gluya. When a Yid experiences in his own matters a revealed divine providence, b'dugmas nisim gluyim, the divine providence is similar to open miracles. Harehu yedeyam. So when he sees this divine providence, which reminds him of miracles, so he knows the fact that he reached this successful thing that he sees by divine providence. It's not in such a way that my strength and the power of my hand caused me to have all this wealth and so on. Why? Why doesn't he consider that? Because he saw personally the open divine providence on every step of the way. And he knows that prior to this, he was in the lowest state. And only through the assistance of Hashem, in a way of an open divine providence, he reached this this state and situation at present now, that he has this success. It could be a person that when he speaks with another, he is actually saying things like as if it is it's something that I thought and I figured it out and I had this and I had that, but that's only speech, which is external. Between him and himself, he knows the truth. This is only by the help of the Eibishter. And then the Rebbe goes further, and what about if the person even believes what he's saying? Even if sometimes he forgets about the open divine providence that he saw in a revealed way, and he actually thinks that my power and the strength of my hands did and created all the success, he need from time to time, when he's inspired at an auspicious occasion, he remembers the truth, he reached this all through Hashem. A Yid looks at himself and says, I misled myself and I felt that was all my doing. So that he's imprisoned by the Eitz Yehoda. And then he was redeemed from that by recognizing, oh no, it wasn't me at all, it was Hashem. That he was Ma'amodei, Matzavai, HaKoidim Shabishval Madrega, or the literal Geula, not the Geula from this mindset, but literally he was in a bad state, and he had this redemption, and he had Hashem's salvation, and he had Hashem's assistance in a way of an open Hashgacha Pratis. Yitochen, it's possible. So now there's a second imprisonment, like the Alter Rebbe's imprisonment was followed by a second imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe. He thinks it's all lost. He was imprisoned, he got out, he was in a terrible situation, and the Eibishter helped him out of it, but he's stuck again in the same situation. That's it. It's over. Because someone that's tied up cannot release himself, the Chazal say. Therefore, he can go to sleep and think that he doesn't have to do anything to extract himself from this imprisonment. Especially if he relies on the promise that no one would push away from Hashem. Surely Hashem will extract them from this imprisonment. When we tell them that we're waiting for his activity that express itself just in using his pinky, meaning that there's a story in Gemara, I might have mentioned this before, about a person who was too poor to bring an offering to the Beis HaMikdash, found a big stone in the forest. They want to bring to the Beis HaMikdash, and it was too heavy for him to bring, and Hashem sent Malachim, described as porters, and they were willing to carry it, but they wanted him just to put one little finger to assist. So when we tell this person that's in trouble a second time around, we're waiting for you to do just a little bit something. Tayin who, he says, there is no hope. We can only rely on Hashem. This is nothing for me to do. So he says, even though this second imprisonment is not as low the way it was the first time around, in this first time around, he was in a very low state, and he was in a much greater, stuck in a much deeper mud than he was before, seemingly to what the difference was between the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe versus the imprisonment of the Mittler Rebbe. Let's skip over the brackets. Let's go down to the fourth paragraph on this new page. The very fact that Hashem took him out and redeemed him from this low state, he still finds himself in the imprisonment of the Yetzer Hara. This shows how great his descent is. For this he is told, the ultimate intent in this great descent is for the sake of an ascent. Through this he will reach a much higher level than he was before the descent. Therefore it's prohibited for him to give up hope. And as a result of giving up hope, he won't do anything. And he say that there's no one to rely on, only on our Father in heaven, because the matters depend upon him. Through his avodah, he will reach through this descent to a much higher elevation. Not only the way he was before the imprisonment, but in a much higher way than before. So both this is an indication both in the material and in the spiritual. And the Rebbe concludes that all of these descents that we see, whatever it is, it's all to be able to reach to a higher level of ascent, just like Yud Kislev that followed in time. Yud Tes Kislev is really about a higher ascent than everything before.